I'd like to call to order the special school board meeting for Tuesday, June 5th. And we have the same people here that we had before with the addition of our attorney, Mr. George. So I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda with the addition of items 2.08 and 2.09.
So moved.
Second.
With a motion by Mrs. Powers and a second by Mr. DiTerlizzi. Approval of the agenda with the addition of 2.08 and 2.09. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries 5-0. The next are 8 or 9 consent agenda items that you see up here behind me. Are there any of these items that anyone would like pulled for discussion? Board members, pulls. Mrs. Powers, is there any that you would like pulled? Mrs. McSorley, would you like any pulled?
The Listen Initiative?
Okay. Mr. DiTerlizzi, are there any you would like pulled?
No, Madam Chairman.
Mrs. Negron?
2.01, please.
So I move approval of the consent agenda with the exception of 2.01 and 2.06. So that would be 2.02, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, and 9.
Second.
There's a motion to approve the consent agenda items numbers 2.02, 2.03, 2.04, 2.05, 2.07, and 2.09. The motion was by
Wait, did you, no, not 2.08?
2.08 and 2.09,
okay.
sorry.
Sorry, I
The
didn't,
motion was by
me.
Mrs. Powers and a second by? Second by?
Ms. McSorley?
Ms. McSorley.
Thank you, Mrs. McSorley. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries 5-0. So we have 2.01 instructional material objection and the recommended order. We have Mrs. Baxter, and I believe perhaps we should hear first from our attorney. Mr. George, do you have anything you wanted to say?
This comes to you under new legislation, so a hearing officer has heard it, made the recommendations to you. There is no burden of proof or presumption under this law at this time built in as to whether anyone else appearing or the board in weighing its decisions needs to give great weight to the magistrate. That being said, you all appointed that magistrate to have these hearings because of an expertise and background in textbook matters. During this proceeding with you all as the board, since the recommendation was to uphold the superintendent's position and the petitioners would have a right, if they wanted to proffer, meaning list the items that they had brought forward at the hearing, that would be available for the board if it wanted to go to the detail of looking at those items. They can't present that in this proceeding or hearing, but they can state what they offered the magistrate for supporting their position that those two textbooks did not meet the guidelines of the state.
Okay. Mrs. Baxter, did you have something?
I just wanted to give the board just an overview in terms of this proceeding. We did have the hearing. We had a total of 7 objections filed by 6 individuals, and it was regarding, 5 individuals, and it was regarding 2 textbooks in particular. It was the biology and the Elevate Science. We did have a hearing, and at the hearing, we had the community members or the parents who had filed objections come and speak. I had provided to the board, we did have that transcribed, that hearing, and I provided to the board a copy of the transcript. The hearing officer, who is not an employee of the district or an agent, Ned Julian, is somebody who is unbiased. He came, heard the evidence, gave everyone an opportunity to speak and present evidence, and he issued his recommendation to the board. And his recommendation to the board was to uphold the March 20th adoption of the science material. So now coming before the board, you have his recommendation and you'll make that final decision. It is not subject to a 120 hearing, and your decision is final. It's not subject to review or appeal.
Okay. Mrs. Negron, did you have something on this?
Actually, I do. I read, and I was here, and a few of us were here for that hearing, and I read Mr. Julian's opinion, and there is, to me, a major thing that he did not include in his opinion. He cited case law, about teaching creationism, intelligent design, and that I already, we already all know that's out there, and those cases are out there. But what he did not address, to me, was Florida statute. And Florida statute is very clear. The board is to provide adequate instructional materials for all students as follows in accordance with the requirements of Chapter 1006. And, 1006 is a very long chapter. I will just read just a small part out of 1006.31. Instructional materials recommended by each reviewer is to be, to the satisfaction of the reviewer, accurate, objective, and balanced. And that, there's, a lot of different statutes that have to do with that, but that to me is the obligation of the board to meet those three, and there's more than that, but to me, this applies to the science materials, that they need to be accurate, objective, and balanced. And I will just read, the Florida Department of Education has a whole definition, explanation of the statute, and I will just read a small part of that that has to do with accuracy of content, which has to do with those three things. Content must be accurate in historical context and contemporary facts and concepts. And then it gives some statutes in 1006. Florida statutes. Objectivity. Content that is included in the materials should accurately represent the domain of knowledge and events. It should be factual and objective. It should be free of inconsistencies, contradictions within itself, and biases of interpretation. It should be free of the biased selection of information. Materials should distinguish between facts and possible interpretations or opinions expressed about factual information. So that, explains the accurate, objective, and balanced. So I would like to give some examples from the textbooks, and I will just use the one textbook. The other one would translate to the middle school textbook of what is offered, and some of the information that would say that this is not accurate, objective, or balanced. Darwin developed a theory of biological evolution that offered a scientific explanation for the unity and diversity of life by proposing how modern organisms evolved through descent from common ancestors. So that's what Darwin set out to prove. Recall that a scientific theory is not a guess, a hunch, or a proposal. A scientific theory is a well-established scientific explanation of events in the natural world. This is from the textbooks that we are talking about adopting. Scientific theories can be used to make predictions about events in the natural world that can be tested by experiments and observations. It's a definition of how you get to a scientific theory. Darwin's work confirmed that the living world is constantly changing, which is interesting to me that they put that in the textbook and didn't put, that he actually proved common descent. Which I agree with that the world is constantly changing. It's when he says things like in the textbook further on, many scientific advances have confirmed and expanded Darwin's hypothesis. Today, evolutionary theory is vital to all biological and biomedical sciences and is often called the grand unifying theory of the life sciences. Like any scientific theory, evolutionary theory is constantly reviewed as new data are gathered. However, any question that remain are about how evolution works and not whether evolution works. And I agree with that. Darwin did prove with his beaks and some of the other things he did, there is microevolution. But he never proved that we descended, like he wanted to prove from microscopic organisms. So that's the textbook. I will read some of the things that say that that's not true. It was and still is the case that, with the exception, and it's a person's name, Dobzhansky's claim about a new species of fruit fly, the formation of a new species by any mechanism has never been observed. Now, remember what the definition of a scientific theory is. It has to be observed and repeatable. And that's from Jeffrey H. Schwartz, Sudden Origins, New York. I've got the references for that. Macroevolution, not microevolution, has never been observed or repeated. Ernst Mayr, the Dean of Living Evolutionists, longtime professor of biology at Harvard, who has alleged that evolution is a simple fact, nevertheless agrees that it is an historical science for which laws and experiments are inappropriate techniques by which to explain it. That's from Scientific American. Evolution must, they feel, explain everything. A theory that explains everything might just as well be discarded since it has no real explanatory value. Of course, the other thing about evolution is that anything can be said because very little can be disproved. Experimental evidence is minimal. And that's from the New Scientist. I've got the author if you want that. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the textbook. Darwin made a breakthrough by recognizing that inherited variation was actually very important because it could provide raw material for a natural mechanism that could drive evolution. Darwin made his mechanism for evolution natural selection. Natural selection is a process by which organisms in nature with variations most suited to their local environment survive and leave more offspring. Well-adapted individuals survive and reproduce. From generation to generation, populations continue to change as they become better adapted or as their environment changes. And then it has a hypothetical example. It couldn't even find a real example of natural selection, evidently, in the textbook. And I'll skip some things so it might not make a little sense because I want to make this as short as possible. This can lead, and they're still talking about natural selection, this can lead to a great diversity of adaptations in species living in different environments. Since Darwin's time, we have learned that natural selection is not the only mechanism that leads to evolutionary change. And now we'll go to some of the objections of that are in the textbook. Anyone who believes evolution works by small changes over longer periods of time must hold that on the average, cumulative selection has to add a little information to the genome at each step. But all of the mutations studied since genetics became a science, not a single one has been found that adds a little information. It is not impossible in principle for a mutation to add a little information, but it is improbable. The neo-Darwinian theory was an attractive theory. Unfortunately, it is based on the false speculation that many small random mutations could build up to large evolutionary changes. That's by Lee Spetner, Not by Chance, Shattering the Myth of Modern Evolution. And then I'm going to give another summary from Dr. John Sanford, a retired Cornell professor, shows in Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Genome that the primary axiom is false, and they're talking about natural selection. The primary axiom is the foundational evolutionary premise that life is merely the result of mutations and natural selection. In addition to showing compelling theoretical evidence that whole genomes cannot evolve upward, Dr. Sanford presents strong evidence that higher genomes must in fact degenerate over time. This book strongly refutes the Darwinian concept that man is just the result of a random and pointless natural process. And again, that's from a book that John Sanford wrote of Cornell University. And now we'll go back to the book. Darwin sketched his thoughts about descent from common ancestors in the form of a branching tree. This tree thinking implies that all organisms are related. Look back in time and you will find common ancestors shared by tigers, panthers, and cheetahs. Look farther back and you will find ancestors that these felines share with dogs, then horses, and then bats. Farther back still is the common ancestor that all mammals share with birds, alligators, and fish. Far enough back are the common ancestors of all living things. According to the principle of common descent, all species, living and extinct, are united by descent from ancient common ancestors and exhibit diversity due to natural selection and adaptation. A single tree of life links all living things. And then I will give the rebuttal. The tree of life concept was absolutely central to Darwin's thinking. Equal importance to natural selection, according to biologist W. Ford Doolittle of Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. Without it, the theory of evolution would never have happened. For a long time, the Holy Grail was to build a tree of life, says Eric Baptiste, an evolutionary biologist at the Pierre and Marie Curie University in Paris, France. A few years ago, it looked as though the Grail was within reach. But today, the project lies in tatters, torn to pieces by an onslaught of negative evidence. Many biologists now argue that the tree concept is obsolete and needs to be discarded. And that is from Lawton Graham, Why Darwin Was Wrong About the Tree of Life, and it's from the New Scientist. And I want to remind you that, accurate, balanced, and objective. And to me, I want our kids to be taught the theory of evolution. I absolutely want them to be taught that. But I also want them to be taught the evidence for evolution and the evidence against evolution. Nothing about creationism, intelligent design. To me, and I believe that's what some of the presenters in their way tried to say, to me, teach the evidence for and against. To me, you don't have critical thinkers, and I know that above all is what we want our students in Martin County to be, is critical thinkers. And you have to have all the information to be a critical thinker. Another excerpt from the textbook. Astonishingly, every scientific test has supported Darwin's basic ideas about evolution. They're saying every test has supported that. Patterns in the distribution of fossils and living species combined with information from geology tell us how modern organisms evolved from their ancestors. And the textbook does at times, they will point out this is a theory, this is what a theory is, and we'll move to that direction. But then so much of their verbiage says, treats it like it's a fact. And it's not a fact, it's a theory. So, again, the rebuttal, this is false. The scientific literature includes many articles with results that are inconsistent with Darwin's theory. All organisms studied so far contain orphan genes that are not found in their supposed ancestors and thus pose a problem for the theory of common ancestry. And that's from Richard Buggs, The Evolutionary Mystery of Orphan Genes from Nature Research in Ecology and Evolution. All evidence indicates that natural selection, like artificial selection, produces only minor changes within existing species. In 2016, Australian biologist Gerd Mueller told a meeting of evolutionary biologists at the Royal Society of London that evolutionary theory has failed to explain, among other things, the origin of new anatomical structures, the main goal of Darwin's theory. New trends in and that's from New Trends in Evolutionary Biology, and there's more, but the Royal Society of London. Back to the textbook. Many recently discovered fossils now show clearly how modern species evolved from extinct ancestors. and it's got a fossil series shown on the next page, documents the evolution of whales from ancient land mammals. Other recent fossil finds connect the dots between dinosaurs and birds and between fishes and four-legged land animals. So many intermediate forms have been found that it is often hard to tell where one group begins and another ends. All historical records are incomplete, and the history of life is no exception. The evidence we do have, however, tells an unmistakable story of evolutionary change. And again, I agree, if we're back to bird beaks and the small changes in species, yes, but not from species to species. That's never been proven. So I'll give the rebuttal. Fossil experts are convinced that none of these animals descended, and they're talking about, I think this one in particular, from animals portrayed before them. And that's from Kevin Patey in The Tale of the Whale, from reports of the National Center for Science Education. Fossils are isolated points in deep time that cannot be connected. And most of these, by the way, are evolutionists speaking, not creationists or anything else. These are evolutionists that I'm quoting, and this happens to be one of them. Fossils are isolated points in deep time that cannot be connected. No fossil is buried with its birth certificate. That and the scarcity of fossils, and remember they just said so many intermediate forms, that and the scarcity of fossils means that it is effectively impossible to link fossils into change of cause and effect in any valid way. As if the chains of ancestry and descent were a real object for our contemplation and not what it really is, a completely human invention created after the fact, shaped to accord with human prejudices. To take a line of fossils and claim that they represent a lineage is not a scientific hypothesis that can be tested. And remember, I said what a scientific theory is. It has to be tested and repeatable. But an assertion that carries the same validity as a bedtime story, amusing perhaps, even instructive, but not scientific. And that's from Henry G., again, an evolutionist, In Search of Deep Time. That's a book, one of the books, many books he wrote. We can't identify ancestors or missing links, and we cannot devise testable theories to explain how particular episodes of evolution came about. This is the same person I'm quoting. G is adamant that all the popular stories about how the first amphibians conquered the dry land, how the birds developed wings and feathers for flying, how the dinosaurs went extinct, and how humans evolved from apes are just products of our imagination, driven by prejudices and preconceptions. Again, that's from Henry G. And back to the textbook. Color coding is used to show the homologous bones in the forelimbs of select modern vertebrates. These limbs evolved from the front limbs of common ancestors whose bones resembled those of an ancient fish. If these animals had no recent common ancestor, they would be unlikely to share so many common structures. Similar structures, like the bones of vertebrate limbs, there's, again, still talking about homologous structures, that are shared by related species and have been inherited from a common ancestor are called homologous structures. Evolutionary theory explains the existence of these structures adapted to different purposes as the result of descent with modification from a common ancestor. Biologists test whether structures are homologous by studying anatomical details, the way structures develop in embryos, and that's important in another quote that I have, and the pattern in which they appear over evolutionary history. Similarities and differences among homologous structures help determine how recently species shared a common ancestor. And this is the rebuttal. If homology is defined as similarity due to common ancestry, it cannot be used as evidence for common ancestry except by reasoning in a circle. Recall the example of similar bone patterns in vertebrate forelimbs, which I just read in the textbook, which Darwin regarded as evidence for the common ancestry of the vertebrates. A neo-Darwinist who wants to determine whether vertebrate forelimbs are homologous, reading too much, must first determine whether they are derived from a common ancestor. In other words, they must be evidence for common ancestry before the limbs can be called homologous. But then to turn around and argue that homologous limbs point to common ancestry creates a vicious circle. Common ancestry establishes homology, which in turn establishes common ancestry. I think as an attorney, you guys would enjoy the reasoning here. But again, you can't say one is a reason for the other. Various biologists and philosophers have noticed and criticized this circularity. When neo-Darwinian paleontologist George Gaylord Simpson tried to use homology
Your brother.
as common ancestry to infer evolutionary relationships, biologists Robert Sokol and Peter Sneed criticized him for his circulatory reasoning. And that's from William Dembinski and Jonathan Wells from The Design of Life. And back to the textbook. Researchers noticed long ago that early developmental stages of many vertebrates look similar. Recent observations make clear that the same, okay,
No, it's all right.
okay.
Okay,
I'll take a break if anybody wants to take a break. Okay, recent observations make clear that the same groups of embryonic cells developed in the same order in the similar pattern to produce many homologous tissues and organs. Similar patterns of embryological development provide further evidence that organisms have descended from a common ancestor. Now we're talking about embryos and how they develop. That was part of, and it's interesting to me. One thing the textbook, actually two things the textbook did that was good, because I had looked back in previous, well, not looked at the actual books, but read about Miller and Levine in previous textbook they'd done. They took out Hegel's embryos, which that's part of what this argument right here is talking about, because they found out those drawings were fake. So at least that's no longer in the textbook. So they did one good thing. They still, to me, have things that need to be addressed. As a rule, this does not indicate common ancestry. They're talking about, I'm reading the rebuttal. In the earliest stages, the embryos of different classes of vertebrates look very different. And that's from Michael Richardson. There's no highly conserved embryonic stage in the vertebrates. And there's many homologous features defined as features with similar structure and position developed from different embryonic cells and developmental patterns. And that's from Gavin De Beer from Homology and Unsolved Problem. That's from Oxford University Press. Back to the textbook. Darwin had noted that different Galapagos finch species have beaks of very different sizes and shapes. Each species uses its beaks just like a specialized tool to pick up and handle its preferred food. And I'll make this one really short. Darwin didn't know that they were finches. So they're in this textbook they're saying he knew they were finches. They weren't finches. That's just small, just a little sidebar. I won't do that one. Natural selection. And I'll try to summarize this one so I don't have to read it all. What this one is saying, and this is from the textbook, there are some scientists that went back to the Galapagos Islands, the Grants, and studied those birds again. I mean, it sounded like to me for years. And, we all know that story, the beaks and the finches, and when there was drought, the beaks got bigger because they had to get to the seeds that were harder to get to. And they, extrapolated, one of the Grant's colleagues calculated that it might take, because they're trying to say that evolution sometimes happens really fast, that it might take no more than 12 to 20 such droughts to change the bird's beak size enough to transform one species to another. What they don't say in the textbook is that once the rain comes back, the beaks shrink back. So again, you can't say that there's evolutionary change because they go back. It's not like, they, see what I'm saying? Because that's what Darwin said. Things progress and then they change to new species. But in this case, the bird's beaks would go back. So it's not going to prove evolution again. By comparing fossils to each other, this is back to the textbook, and to living organisms, paleontologists can propose and test evolutionary hypotheses. Fossils reveal information about the structures of ancient organisms, the sequential nature of groups in the fossil record, evolution from common ancestors, and the ecology of ancient environments. Comparisons of body structure test hypothesis about the appearance, evolution, and history of groups in the fossil record. Studies of evolutionary change in body structures can also test hypotheses about evolution of living species from extinct common ancestors and the evolution of diversity. And again, I'm not a scientist and I can read this, but I'll try to spare you guys. The rebuttal to this is the Cambrian explosion. And in the Cambrian explosion, they found that all of the forms of life seem to appear at once. And so they have a hard time explaining evolution because of that layer, the Cambrian explosion, because they look at the rocks and the levels, and they say, it started out here, with microscopic, and then it moved up the chain. Well, again, the Cambrian explosion, which is one of those layers, seems to have every form in it. And so that's something that they don't explain, that's hard to prove Darwin's theory.
Excuse me, one
Go
second, Ms. Negron. Do you have a lot more? I mean, I'm happy to continue to listen, but we approved on the consent agenda the social worker issue, and we specifically asked someone to stay and answer questions when it came to that. So I wanted to make sure we're not
I
having.
notified them, yeah.
Okay.
That was approved,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, okay.
All right, so we're good.
Thank you, we're good.
There were no
Also, for the listen
questions that,
Initiative was pulled.
Yeah, we're gonna get that one as soon as she's done.
okay.
Yeah,
And
but-
and I don't mind taking a break to do the listening, so people, because I did give,
no, go ahead and finish whatever you have. We're fine.
but I would prefer not to keep people if they don't need to stay.
I just have a quick comment on the Listen Initiative. If you
Well-
want to get to that.
I'm fine with that.
Do you want to take the listen initiative and then go back?
Yeah, I
to-
don't want people to have to, I
Right.
mean, it's coming to 5 o'clock. I'm hearing the thunder outside. I don't want people to have to stay if they don't have to.
Okay, well,
think it's
let's,
actually
if you
reading.
could wait a minute, Mrs. Baxter, we'll look at the listen initiative. So, and I know the superintendent, as far as the listen initiative goes, I know you got the data thing. I know that the superintendent has received a lot of unsolicited comments from that, which she hasn't, I said, rather than flood us with that, she can compile those and give those to us later. I did go to the screening, the movie screening on Thursday, saw the whole movie screening and went, oh, yeah, you're right, Mrs. Powers, I hear it. And then went to the training afterwards, and it was very impactful. It was very meaningful, very impactful, and it was very well received, and a lot of very good comments from our staff. But anyway, go ahead. Listen initiative. Did you have any particular
No, I
questions?
don't need any presentation.
Okay, good.
I should have also at the same time pulled for discussion. That's why I delayed when you were asking for the second about the social workers. And I just want to reiterate, I'm fine with both of them. I'm not really fine with both of them, but not because of the agenda items, but because we still don't have a comprehensive new mental health plan based on legislation. And I understand that I understand the timeline has prevented that. But there is in no world do people approve things like this with these expenses without putting together comprehensive plans. And my point here being is this consistently happens year after year due to legislation that we are rushing to push things through that aren't properly vetted, that we don't have a plan for, and we try to shove them into whatever corner we can create because we have to finish something in a specific amount of time. I mean, the fact that we got presented, and this is not your fault, you literally drove back from a training today where DOE doesn't even have all their ducks in a row to present a draft of something that you probably haven't even had time to discuss with the mental health group that you've put together. And now we're approving hundreds of thousands of dollars in expenditures on social workers. And listen, I have a major problem with that. Taxpayers should have a major problem with that. But I want to make clear, this is not our doing. This is, once again, and this happens every year about this time of year, legislation comes out in May or June, and we're doing this every summer. It's unacceptable, and it's an unacceptable way to spend taxpayer dollars, and it's an unacceptable way to run an organization. Thank you for your work, but I have people need to understand what happens summer after summer after summer. Because what just happened here is all my money, and it's your money and your money and your money and your money. And we just keep, because we're forced to by the legislature. And that's all I had to say about it, and I'm sorry you had to wait, but I think it's really important that the public, even though no one will likely hear this, understands what really happened today and why this is being done so quickly.
Thank you, Mrs. Powers.
I just want to say, I appreciate the comments and I understand the legislative mandates, but the way I rationalize this is, I have been talking about having social workers in our schools for a very long time, not just to address the legislation, but to be a part of the disciplinary process for students who are repeat offenders, because we know that there's something going on outside of our school, that a social worker has the capabilities and the education to deal with that teachers in a classroom, number one, don't have time or the expertise in many cases to deal with these very complex issues. So the way I look at it is that, you know, especially the social workers, in my mind, it has zero impact on that legislative mandate has zero impact on my decision that was made today to approve that, because we have needed it for a long time. If that had to be the impetus, so be it.
Do you feel there's
But-
an adequate plan in place for the use of social workers right now?
No, but you know what? I have to have a level of trust that our staff is going to do what's right for kids. Am I going to have? Will we have a step by step? I absolutely think we will.
But
I think
that's
this
not
is
how
good
you
for
do
kids.
business. It's not,
This-
I agree, but it's not how you do business. I totally trust our staff. But to put things in, it's the chicken or the egg, it's what we do over and over and over again.
Through no fault of staff.
Through
Yeah.
no fault
No.
of staff.
Okay, Mr. DiTerlizzi, did you have anything about listen?
No, I was gonna make a motion to approve it.
I do have something.
Second.
Okay,
But for
we have a
discussion.
motion by Mr. DiTerlizzi and a second by, wait a minute. Motion by Mr. DiTerlizzi, a second by Mrs. Powers.
By the way, I agree with what they both said.
Okay, and I do too. And Mrs. Negron, you have something else you want to say?
Yes, you said something about data for Listen.
Yes, it was in your box and it's uploaded.
Are you talking
The
about,
We
IRB.
also have the student
okay, I can't find it. in
film
my
if she
stack.
wants to see that.
Right, we also
We do have a
the
link.
student, they have the access to he sent us the student testimonials, if anybody.
Right. Yeah.
I'm talking about actual,
Yes, I'm
Data.
talking about the actual data. You have that. It's in a, that's it, right there.
that I just received, that I haven't
No, it's been
had
in
it.
your box for,
Since
Well, I-
yesterday.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, so yesterday, and I've been out of town. If somebody else has seen this, do they have any data about, has this decreased suicides, bullying, anything like that? Is there
this
anything in
is,
there?
if you went to the screening and the training afterwards, this is a more, and I think Mrs. Vogel sent an email that probably explains it the best, that this is a more comprehensive, initiative, and correct me if you all think I'm wrong. It's more of a culture change that deals with more than just bullying. I mean, this is a culture change that is kind of saying everybody has something going on in their lives. And this isn't just a simple, let's all be nice to each other. This is everybody needs to stop, take a moment, and realize the same way that you have things going on in your life, everybody has something going on in their life. And that the presenter made a very good point that we are taught to eat, we are taught to speak, we are taught to walk, but the thing that we're not taught to do as children is to listen. We're just told to listen, and we're not taught how to appropriately listen. And what the true meaning of listen isn't just to open your ears and listen to somebody speak. It's to kind of accept what it is that they're saying and listen as a whole body kind of experience. I mean, it was very, and I did look at look at the Rachel thing that was online, and this is much more comprehensive. I think Mrs. Vogel mentioned that,
Here's her email.
I think she mentioned that she was involved with
With Rachel's
Rachel's
Challenge
Challenge, and it
in
was
Palm Beach County.
it was a middle school
And
thing.
who was involved?
Well, and
Mrs. Vogel?
And I
Lori
kind
Vogel,
of,
the
I kind of
principal
look
at-
at this as a conversation starter. I think it's extremely impactful. I think that, you know, we have to do something to
We do.
get attention to our community. And this is an attention getter. This is
It is.
a way to start the conversation, and get things moving.
It is, and it's a whole community conversation. It includes parents, it includes community members, it includes teachers, it includes students. This isn't a matter of, students, let's wear a wristband, sign a banner, and we're all on board with this, and we're gonna be nice to each other. This is a change, this is a culture change. But this is a,
Okay, so I would like to know, in one of the deliverables, it says there's a listen curriculum. Could we address that? What the curriculum is and what the listener guides are?
okay, so here's what the problem is, and we run into this continuously as a board, is that when you want something, the time to say that you want it really isn't at the meeting when we're getting ready to approve it. So, and I should have said something last month, but, you know, when or the last meeting we had, when we're looking at listen, and then Mrs. Negron, with all due respect, you bring up, well, I'd like to look at Rachel's Challenge, and I kind of look at that as, if you truly want the district to look at Rachel's Challenge, and you want your board members to look at Rachel's Challenge, the time to bring it up on something as important and as timely as this is not at the meeting when we're getting ready to vote on it. If you can give us that information ahead of time, if the staff could look at that information and know that there's something you're looking at, and if we could have the time, because otherwise, all we do is we just delay something and push it on back.
But
I
I
don't know,
I had brought
don't
that up
know,
months
I-
ago with some of the staff. So that, don't say that I haven't brought it up. I have brought up Rachel's Challenge, and I have spoken to the district about Rachel's Challenge. So I don't need a lecture. Thank you.
And they will-
So
Excuse
to me, I.
Excuse me,
but
Thank you.
I don't need a lecture, though.
thank you. So, Mr. DiTerlizzi, did you have any questions?
No, ma'am.
Mrs. Negron, did you have any questions? Additional questions, Mrs. Negron?
Yes, actually, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
So, again, I would like to, I mean, I don't have to see the curriculum, I just want to know what, there's curriculum, who's going to teach it, and what does that entail? Again, from what I understood, from the explanations that I received about Listen, this was new. The movie maybe had been out a while, but the curriculum was new. That was the explanation because I asked questions of staff. That's what I understood it to be, that it's new. So I would like to know what it is we're being delivered. Who is going to teach it? Is somebody going to teach it? In other words, yes, Rachel's Challenge in Mrs. Vogel's experience may not have entailed all the things that you're looking for in this, but I do know at looking at the website that it does involve a curriculum. It can involve the community being involved in it. And I have talked to other people evidently I didn't know Mrs. Vogel had worked with it, but people who are aware of it. And to me, if we're spending over $45,000, it doesn't hurt maybe to look at something else and say, this is what we want it to accomplish. And if we're going to spend that much money, I would like something that's not a one and done thing. I want it to continue, or to have the potential to continue, to have the potential to go maybe to the middle schools or the elementary. So when you start with something, again, it's something that's been in place. Rachel's Challenge has conducted over 5,000 school programs. It goes every year. They've been doing it about 10 years. Over 1.5 million people have been involved in it. More than 1,200 schools and businesses have been reached. Over 150 suicides have been averted. Bullying and violence have decreased. Community service and acts of kindness have increased. And that's what we're talking about, acts of kindness. We want people, generally you have to listen if you're going to be kind to people. I don't want this to be a short-term, one-time thing. So that's all I asked. I just think if we're going to spend that much money, it needs to be something that's not, a brand-new thing, a flash in the pan. That's all I'm asking. So, but I'm one board member. And
So the proposal today before you is for the 3 high school school-wide screenings to include the charter school and also the alternative school. And it will also include the trainings, the active listener trainings, which will be done at the high school after the screenings with a select group of the students and also the faculty members and staff. The curriculum is another added piece, which is not part of this proposal. We did talk about sustainability with Mr. Christopher and how to actually utilize that. His curriculum is not right now state approved. So he is putting that before, he's trying to find the process for that to get that state approved. So that could be another piece to follow up. But the curriculum that we're actually looking to put before you for a vote would be the Sandy Hook Promise, which is a free curriculum. And we are still working on those pieces of gathering information. They were in the process of getting approved by the state. So we're waiting for that to come through before we actually bring that to you and share that information.
is there a timeline that we have to have this approved by so that, you know, I mean, is there some state mandate that we're having to meet that we're doing this?
Our mental health plan is due by Our mental health plan is due by August 1st.
Okay, so we
So
have
we
a
would have-
couple more months, so,
Well, we only have till the July board meeting because it has to go to
Okay.
the state board approved.
And one of the things that is, we're in a time here, is that we've already missed out on the opportunity for him to secure the dates. That's why it's being brought forward, and also with the mental health piece to come forward. He is the keynote speaker next week at FSBA, and once he presents at FSBA, he's holding his date for us until today. I'm afraid that we will lose him. If we're going to move forward with a mental health initiative, I would prefer that we begin it in the beginning of the year and not wait till December or January to start a mental health initiative. This is the catalyst for the conversation. It was very powerful. I received many unsolicited emails. We have staff members that are here to speak to the impact that it made upon them. We had operations side of the house involved in this that came up and said, we have never participated in something like this. You know, staff that said, I've been here for 13 years and we have never had anything like this, as so moving and so powerful. So this is not a one and done thing. If you would participate, you know, you would see it's not a one and done thing. I think that there's, you know, a plan that's coming forward. This is not the only thing, and it's not a one and done. So there are many moving parts and components to the initiative.
but to me, if the $45,000 doesn't include some of these other things, I again would at least like to look, I think Sandy Hook, the program that I saw on one of the things that we got on the agenda today is maybe one of those programs. I would like to know if there's something that maybe we could get the curriculum included in the price, and it wouldn't be, I just think, you know, again, we're spending taxpayer dollars, like you
It
said.
includes 3 active, 3 Listen curriculum licenses, the Listen curriculum video teacher conference training, the active listener guides, he's doing the 3 days of listening screening and discussions, and the active listener trainings. He's also doing the community piece, you know, so it's not just having a film.
But it's the discussion afterwards, and I again, with the mental health piece, I think it would be nice if we were partnering better with our community, with our nonprofits, with other organizations in our community, and I just looking back at Rachel's challenge, the way that they do it, and they've been doing it so long, they do reach out and help you reach out to the community better and coordinate that effort better. I just think price-wise and, you know, to compare when you're spending that much money, and especially to me, the suicide rate in Martin County is, I'm sure you know, is much higher than the Florida average. This is,
How much
and I
does
know you guys
Rachel's-
all know it. It's very serious.
But how much is that? Like, what does that cost to Rachel's?
It's cost of materials, so when comparing, if you're looking at curriculum now, for students, and this, we were looking at this for staff as well, but the state sort of changed our direction when they directed us to go to mental health first aid for everyone. So now we're looking at student curriculum, and the difference between Rachel's Challenge and Sandy Hook Promise is that Sandy Hook Promise has local trainers that will train trainers, so we could build capacity quicker. Rachel's Challenge, you have to go through their trainers. Also, they have different components that we could be trained as trainers within the district, particularly looking at the social workers who are going to be trained. So that would be the difference. Rachel's is materials cost, and the other one is free.
So you mentioned that Sandy Hook Promise is free.
Yes,
And is there data to back that up?
yes, I can get that. I can
Okay.
get that for the board.
Mr. DiTerlizzi, did you have something?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I'm sure both of these programs, plus the Sandy Hook, is probably some good programs. I think more importantly to me at this point is that as we move forward, I'd like there to be some way to track some of the data that, as we move forward.
We intend to do that. We're going to be looking at discipline data, but also we're working with our local law enforcement to look at Baker Act data. And I can let Mr. Scholl speak to this, but prevention data, as you all know, is very hard to obtain because you don't exactly know how many of anything you prevent, how many Baker Acts you prevent, or how many death by suicide you prevent, because
Well, I'm
we may
kind
not
of
know
skeptical when
that.
someone said, when it said that, I don't know how many deaths they prevented. I don't know how you tell that, because
It's more,
anybody,
I think, response, so in response to it, and then
yeah.
But if the
A positive.
suicide rate went down in Martin County, that would say
Listen,
something.
And I'm hoping that you can provide that data, whatever you can get. And it's a good opportunity for us to reduce those suicides and, reduce some of the problems we have through mental health issues.
Absolutely.
So,
Thanks for the.
One's too many.
But the suicide, sorry, just real quick, the suicide rate by the CDC, Martin County 17.4, Florida is 14.0. That's from the CDC, so.
But
That
that's not
includes
just children.
everyone, so that's not necessarily our
Right.
10 to 21 population.
right.
We are higher, though, in our our population of students, because I checked on that. I think we're number 10 in the state.
Yeah.
We have a motion from Mr. DiTerlizzi and a second from Mrs. Powers. Did you want to discuss this more, or are you ready for somebody to call the question?
Go ahead.
There's a motion on the floor.
Or I can delay you if you'd like.
Mr. Scholl?
Yes, this
Yeah.
is Mr. Mark Scholl.
Good,
Why would you want to do that? Sorry.
because I put on a nice shirt today.
Really handsome.
Yeah, thank you. I clean up very well. I'm taking my summertime to be here because mental health is very important to me. I've known some of you for as long as I've been in Martin County, for almost 2 decades. What I want to say is I start every morning preparing myself to go to school, and you can hear the emotion in my voice, because I never know when I get to school who's going to be waiting for me. So I have a wife, I've got 2 dogs, and I have a son, and lots of times I have some breakfast on my shirt, so on the way to work it's been some stress. So I take that time to be prepared because 75% of the days I show up at work, there's a child waiting for me at my office. And at that moment, the most important thing is that I'm there for that child. So this is not intentional, and I was never a drama actor or theater major, but it's a very emotional toll. I'm one for 600 students. So it's very possible that student waited a week to come and see me. So I need to be on point. I need to be on game. So when we're talking right now about getting initiative launched, I truly appreciate the timeline and the crunch. I experienced that at my school site as well. But what I'd like to impress upon everybody is that the best time to do something is now. And it may not be perfect, and I'm grateful to have been invited onto this team because the future that Martin County can create for its students with a collective desire to make an impact is very powerful. The movie Listen is, as Ms. Powers said, is a great jumping off point. And there's a lot of work to be done, but it was exciting to see the superintendent there and coordinators there and every principal from every school, because the guidance counselors, when we get involved in a student's life, we come in with putting the person before the process. And even my principal, my current principal right now, was strongly impacted by this, and he was reminded, I need to pay attention to the person in front of me and be aware of the trauma-informed care. So I do encourage the vote to kind of move forward as far as curriculum and things are concerned. Obviously, we've heard there's lots of decisions to make, but I would like to provide any information that I can for you members if I haven't already. And that's why I came here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor from Mr. DiTerlizzi, a second from Mrs. Powers. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No, and I would like it recorded for the record that the reason I am voting against it is financial reasons. I believe we could probably find something that was more financially, it just would be better with spending taxpayer dollars. And I would also have liked to have compared some programs, because there might be some better ones out there. So if you could record that for the record, I would appreciate it.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your staying and bringing this to us. Okay, we're back to 2.01, instructional materials.
Madam Chair, you know, we got an awful lot of information from Rebecca today, and I have similar comments, but they're a whole lot shorter. Actually, my son went through this in high school, and they were, maybe it was middle school, I don't remember, but they were teaching, the teacher came in dressed as a cave woman, and long story short, he questioned her and wound up having to do his own presentation on creationism. And I think if you're not going to teach both, then you shouldn't teach either, is really where I feel. And so I don't think our curriculum should have one or the other. It should either have, hang on, my turn to speak. Whether it's creationism, whether it's debunking Darwin's theory versus Darwin's theory, that's fine, but I personally believe that it should either have both, or at the least, maybe, what?
By law, you have to teach evolution, by law.
Well,
You
then you
you
ought to-
have to teach it, and by law, by the cases, that's what I referenced earlier.
Okay.
But by so far, what the courts have said, you cannot teach creationism, and you cannot teach intelligent design. So by law, you have to teach, and by our Florida.
change the law.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
But that's why, to me, I stated at the beginning, looking at Florida statutes, and things have to be accurate, objective, and balanced. And what I read, the explanation from the Department of Education to me on this topic, you know, that is not met. The balance of proof to me is not met, and I can keep going because there's more. There's a lot more. Well, not a lot. I think I've done 3 pages. There's maybe 2.5, 3 more. But that is what the textbook has, is all of the evidence for, you know, and then, and to me, not just that, because the evidence for is fine, I agree with that, but the evidence against, to me, is lacking. And then the way it is stated, yes, they state it as a theory, but then, and I will give you another example, they state it as fact. So, you know, you cannot have both. You know, humans, I'll read from the textbook. Humans and other primates evolved from common ancestor that lived more than 65 million years ago. I mean, that's stated as a fact. You can't, I mean, we evolved. That's not a theory, that's stating as a fact. Molecular biologists have analyzed mitochondrial DNA from living humans around the world to determine when we last shared a common ancestor. Not, you know, did we, you know, we're still looking into it. It's when we shared that common ancestor. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived side by side for thousands of years. And there's a whole thing on Neander, and I don't know if you guys, there's different, you know, fossils they've found that they think are either human or not human, and they thought human. It goes back and forth with Neanderthals, whether they were human or not. And I just, to me, the textbook does not present the material
So,
accurately, balanced, and objectively.
so what are you looking for, Rebecca?
I believe that we could find supplemental materials just to give the evidence against evolution, and I think that would address that problem. Now, whether we can or not, I would have to lean on the attorneys to ask. To me, we can create curriculum for our students. So I don't see why we couldn't have supplemental materials that just say, this is what the textbook says, and these are some of the things, the evidence against evolution or the difference. And I'll give you one, it's interesting, just one of the last interesting ones, if I can find it really quick.
And while you're doing that, Dr. Miller, could you look up and see what the standards are that, the science standards that have to do with evolution, and perhaps you could give those to us?
Just find it.
I have some questions too.
Oh,
Can I
okay.
ask my question?
Well, while she's looking,
To
why don't you
Helene,
go
can I
ahead.
ask you questions, Helene? The complaints that were filed, were they parents, grandparents, residents, or all of the above, none of the above? Do you have any demographics on the complaints?
We have, several of them were, let's see, I have community members. I have one that was a concerned parent. I have,
And I saw those, I just
Let's
wanted them stated for the
a
record.
lot of them were community.
Community members who have no children in the
Right.
schools? Okay, and the second question is, what was the cost of the hearing officer?
The cost of the hearing officer.
Can't control that anyway.
I'm going somewhere.
And I have the transcript, getting a copy of the transcript, which we needed was, that alone was 923.
And then the
And
hearing
I believe the
officer,
hearing officer, for writing the report and attending hearing was about $1,800.
okay, and was that funded by the Department of Education since they're requiring us to do these hearings now? We did not receive any additional funding, so that came out of current school district funding. So the mandate to do this was unfunded.
Yep.
Just want to clarify that.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
My other question is that a normal, how many staff members were involved in preparing for this hearing, and what would be your estimated number of hours for the hearing and the preparation?
You were gathering that information. I'm looking at Dr.
Dr.
Miller,
Miller,
and I
do you
believe
know?
she was actually gathering that information so she could.
Good afternoon, Tracy Miller, Chief Academic Officer. We did start to track that information. Valerie Gaynor obviously spent the majority of her time working on this, including weekends. We tracked time for the secretary in our department, my time. I did not actually track your time or your secretary's time. We are at well over 40, 50 hours of staff time to prepare documents, and then the time.
Yeah, it would probably be
Initially.
additional, probably about 20 hours of my time.
Okay, so I just want to make a statement, and you can say yes or no. So we went through a formal textbook adoption process with textbooks that the state of Florida approved. We adopted those materials with teachers, community members. It was wide open to anyone who wanted to participate in the adoption process and submit concerns at that time. We made a recommendation for adoption. Then complaints were filed by, how many, 8 residents? Was it
We
8?
had a total of
Five.
7.
7?
But it was, no, it was a total of 5, but they, wait, 6,
It was
right.
5 or 6?
Yeah.
Okay, less than 10.
7 objections.
And then
6 people.
we are now at least 40 to 60 hours of our staff time that's been spent. We spent $1,800 on the hearing officer. We spent $900 on the transcript. We are spending hours. I mean, we're here an hour now doing this because of a mandate sent down by the Tallahassee and Florida Department of Education in which the person assigned upheld the adoption? Yes or no? Just say yes or no. Is that what just happened?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I need.
And I would like to add to that there were nearly 40 people, well, I think I didn't get an accurate count, 40 citizens, parents that were here for that hearing. So, you know, if you want to count numbers, you need to include them. Also, Tallahassee, a lot of the things that it requires us to do is because citizens, our neighbors, talk to them and say, you know, this is a problem. We're not, and I know in this case, we're not being listened to by the school district. And so Tallahassee intervenes in ways probably that maybe aren't always the best, but I know they're not just making this up as they go. They're doing it to address concerns of their constituents.
So Dr. Miller, what is SC 7.L.15.1? Do you have that?
I do. Explain how the scientific theory of evolution is supported by the fossil record, comparative anatomy, comparative embryology, biogeography, molecular biology, and observed evolutionary change.
And what is SC 7.L.15.2?
I have not pulled that one up yet. This was the first one that I got. That's the correlative seventh grade standard for evolution as well. Those were the two standards, one for each book, one for the objections that we received.
And then there's the SC 912.L.15.1, correct?
Yes, that's the ninth grade standard. So
So-
we have ninth grade and seventh grade.
So can we teach something that's not the standard?
You must teach the standard. We can decide to do something in addition. One of the comments that was actually made after the hearing by one of the members of the public, that member said, well, you know, why don't we do something in addition? We can do more. And actually, one of the objectioners said, you know what? I was just recently a student, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously. He said, you see that book over there? It's this thick. Teachers have 1 year to teach what's in that book. They can't get through what's in the book, let alone layering additional materials on top of that to teachers. The teachers are never going to be able to do it. That was actually what the petitioner, a summary of his thought.
But we're required to teach these.
We're
standards,
required to
correct?
teach these standards. We are not required to teach in addition to the standard.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So let me just make up, I mean, having two recent graduates from our high schools specifically, and one still in high school, and that, you know, again, this comes back to trust. And, you know, the discussions that are taking place in our classroom, you know, are not narrow-minded. I think, and I think good teachers are teaching everything. They're not just teaching evolution, I can tell you that. But they're not, I have never had, as a parent, ever had an experience where someone's personal opinion was thrust upon my children to the point where they felt uncomfortable. Never. So, in the textbook, some teachers teach to the textbook, some teachers don't. Some kids never open up at the textbook. The teachers know what to teach. They know how to teach it. The textbook is sometimes a tool and sometimes it's not. That happens in high school. It happens in college. My kids in college don't even have textbooks for some of their classes. You know, we can continue on with this discussion. I feel like we're and Ms. McSorley's comments the same. It's like, I get it, your frustration with these unfunded mandates. And my answer to that in Tallahassee is, you know, and I also see Ms. Negron's point that the legislature is addressing concerns from their constituents. But don't you think it would be easier to address that to the people that actually work for them at DOE and saying, this adoption process, you need to look at this and consider what you put on your approved list, rather than micromanaging at the district level what and how we do things. It should be addressed at that level. We should have a list, and we should be comfortable and confident in that list. and that it should be, it should address the things that our lawmakers expect, because that's really who they work for. I mean, all those state employees are dependent on and following the laws that the legislature makes. I don't understand why now we are now being micromanaged at the district level. I agree, the unfunded piece of it, but this is just another case of micromanaging, and at some point, it's got to stop, and we have to say, just because we can do it doesn't mean we always should do it, and this is why we will never have really great science teachers, and we're not going to be able to recruit good science and math and STEM, because we're constantly being micromanaged at the local level. Everybody's throwing their hands up. So I choose as a school board member to have a level of trust in our teachers and our staff. If there is ever an incident where my child felt uncomfortable in the classroom, I would deal with that as a parent. I don't think that we need to put in place rules across the board because we have a teaching style that somebody doesn't like, or a certain word that somebody said that they don't like. That I'm like, where does it stop?
I motion to approve.
So Mrs. McSorley has a motion to approve the recommended order. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mrs. Powers.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir?
since this is a review of the hearing officer's recommendations, I would recommend that you ask if any of those 6 petitioners wanted to make a proffer.
Okay. Would any of the 6 petitioners like to make a proffer? Hearing none. We have a motion and a second to approve the recommended order.
So
All
are
those-
is that the public meeting, or we just, what are we approving in item 2.01?
The recommended order from Mr. Julian.
Okay, so we're approving his work product.
We're approving his, if you could explain that?
Yeah, and I did draft, the final order for the board, which would be upholding the approval that the board actually already gave on March 20th. So I can. And essentially, and I can just read it, it's not very long. It says, "Final order. This matter came to be heard by the Martin County School Board on June 5th, 2018, for the entry of a final order upholding the adoption of instructional materials on March 20th, 2018, following a hearing on the objection by parents, community members, petitioners pursuant to Florida Statute 1006.28. The school board, having reviewed the complete record and being fully advised in the premises, it is hereby ordered and adjudged as follows. Number 1, on March 20th, 2018, following all procedural requirements, the school board adopted instructional materials for the science curriculum. Number 2, following this adoption, the Martin County School District received 7 objections from 6 individuals challenging the adoption of the following instructional materials. A, biology by Miller and Levine. B, Elevate Science, Course 2 by Miller, Padilla, and Wysessen. Number 3, on May 17, 2018, a hearing on the objections was held before the hearing officer, Ned Julian Esquire. Mr. Julian is a qualified, unbiased hearing officer. Number 4, at the hearing, the petitioners were given an adequate and fair opportunity to be heard and present evidence to the hearing officer. Number 5, on May 23, 2018, the hearing officer issued an order recommending that the school board enter a final order upholding the adoption of biology by Miller and Levine and Elevate Science by Miller, Padilla, and Wysessen. The Martin County School Board, based on the foregoing, hereby enters this final order upholding the adoption of the instructional materials for the science curriculum adopted on March 20th, 2018, done and ordered this 5th day of June, 2018. The School Board of Martin County, Florida, School Board Chair.
Thank you. So the motion is to uphold the adoption action of the Martin County School Board for these 2 items. One is, the motion was by Mrs. McSorley, the second by Mrs. Powers. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
4-1 with Mrs. Negron dissenting.
3-2.
Oh, 3-2, sorry. With Mrs. Negron and Mr. DiTerlizzi dissenting. Okay, our next is a public hearing regarding the environmental science instructional materials adoption. And remember, this one was pulled back so that all of the environmental science teachers could be
Could participate.
consultant and participate in the,
That's correct. So this is just an opportunity for any member of the public who would like to speak to the board. Now, understanding that it's the intention of staff to ask the board to approve these materials, this is an opportunity as required by statute for any member of the public to share their thoughts about these materials with the board.
thank you. Is there anyone present from the public who would like to speak to the adoption of the environmental science textbook, Sustaining Your World by Miller and Spoolman from 2017? Hearing none, are there any comments from the board?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so then this will move on to the next, to the final. For board adoption. This will come back to us for board adoption, and then that will start the 30-day clock again, in case there's a member out there in the public who hasn't participated yet, who wants to then object, and if they do object, then we will have the Mr. Julian or somebody come back, and we will do this all over again, correct? Thank you. At this time, we have open to the public. Is there anybody here from the public that would like to speak? And then we have open to the board. Anybody from the board that would be interested in speaking? And so we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Do I need to make a motion that we adjourn?
No.